Couple rejects baby with disabilities. Nurse adopts him, and he moves to another hospital. There comes a time in life when we are tested in ways we never imagined. A moment when our choices reveal who we truly are inside. This is the story of a baby rejected by his own parents at the moment he needed love the most, and of an ordinary woman who made an extraordinary choice. It's a story about courage, compassion, and how a small heart can transform an entire hospital. Prepare yourself, because what you are about to discover will move you from beginning to end. It all began on a cold winter morning, when the corridors of the central hospital were silent, illuminated only by the dim lights of the night shifts. It was one of those nights when time seems to stand still, when suddenly the cries of a woman in labor echoed through the maternity ward corridor. The medical team rushed to the delivery room. Among them was Clara, a 42-year-old nurse with tired but gentle eyes who had witnessed hundreds of births throughout her career. However, that night would be different from all the others. The baby was born after hours of intense labor, but when the cry finally filled the room, an awkward silence fell. The doctors exchanged worried glances. Clara immediately realized something was wrong. The baby, a small and fragile boy, had features that indicated a rare genetic condition. His almond-shaped eyes, the shape of his face, his delicate little hands, everything pointed to Down syndrome. Furthermore, the initial tests revealed a heart complication that would require surgery in the coming months. Clara carefully held the baby, wrapping him in a soft blanket, and carried him to his anxiously waiting parents. The father, a well-dressed businessman, quickly rose from his chair. The mother, still pale and exhausted from the birth, looked at her son for the first time. What should have been a moment of joy turned into something devastating. The father recoiled, shaking his head negatively. The mother began to cry, but they weren't tears of happiness. They were tears of rejection. "We can't keep him," the father said coldly, avoiding direct eye contact with the baby. The doctor tried to intervene, explaining that the child's condition wouldn't prevent him from having a full and happy life, that with proper care he could develop wonderfully. But the couple had already made their decision. They didn't want an imperfect child. That wasn't what they had planned. They wanted to return the child, as if it were possible to simply undo a birth. The mother didn't even want to hold him in her arms. Clara felt her heart clench in her chest. During all those years working in the maternity ward, she had seen everything, but never such a cold, immediate rejection. She held the baby tighter, as if she wanted to protect him from the cruelty of the world she had just come to know. The parents signed the custody relinquishment papers in the following hours and left the hospital before dawn, without looking back even once. The little baby, who didn't even have a name yet, was taken to the newborn nursery. Clara couldn't get that baby out of her head during her entire shift. Every time she passed the nursery, she stopped to watch him through the glass. He slept peacefully, oblivious to the fact that he had been abandoned. His little fingers twitched occasionally, as if he were dreaming. There was something about that little face that deeply touched Clara's heart in a way she couldn't explain. Perhaps it was his fragility, or perhaps it was the fact that she herself had never been able to have children, despite always wanting to be a mother. Her marriage had ended years ago, partly because of this impossibility, and since then she had dedicated herself completely to her work, taking care of other people's children. But that baby was different. He had no one. That night, before going home, Clara stayed a little longer at the hospital. She asked permission to hold the baby, and when she held him in her arms, she felt something change inside her. It was as if all the pieces of a puzzle finally fell into place. In the following days, Clara returned to the hospital even on her days off. She fed the baby, changed his diapers, and spoke to him softly while rocking him. The other nurses began to notice the special bond that was forming. One of them, her friend Maria, pulled Clara aside one afternoon and cautiously said that it was best not to get too attached, that the baby would soon be placed in the adoption system or a foster care institution. But Clara had already made a decision. She sought out the hospital's social worker and inquired about the adoption process. It would be long, bureaucratic, and full of challenges, but she was willing to face them all. She wanted to give that child a home. She wanted to be the mother he deserved from the very first moment. The social worker explained that it would be necessary to go through evaluations, interviews, home visits, and that there were no guarantees. But when she looked into Clara's determined eyes, something told her that this woman wouldn't give up easily, and she was absolutely right. The journey was only beginning, and no one could imagine the impact that baby would have on everyone around him. Weeks turned into months, and Clara threw herself headlong into the adoption process. Each completed document, each interview, each visit from the social worker to her modest home was a step closer to realizing her dream of being a mother. Meanwhile, the baby remained in the hospital, growing slowly under the watchful care of the medical team. Clara had decided to name him Miguel, a name that meant, "He who is like God," because for her, that little being was truly a divine gift. Miguel needed to undergo his first heart surgery at 3 months old. It was a delicate and risky procedure, and Clara spent the entire night in the hospital waiting room, even though she wasn't officially his mother yet. She prayed, cried, and waited with an anguish that only a true mother could feel. When the surgeon finally came out of the operating room and said that everything had gone well, Clara felt her legs weaken with relief. She ran to the neonatal ICU, and through the glass, saw Miguel connected to tubes and monitors, but breathing, fighting, living. At that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that she would do anything for that boy. The adoption was finally approved when Miguel turned 6 months old. Clara would never forget the day the judge banged the gavel and officially declared her Miguel's legal mother. She held the baby in her arms throughout the hearing, and when she left the courthouse, she felt her life finally had the purpose she had always sought. She took Miguel home that same day. The house, which had previously seemed empty and silent, was now full of life. Clara had transformed the guest room into a cozy nursery with light blue painted walls, colorful mobiles hanging from the ceiling, and shelves full of children's books. The first few months at home were challenging. Miguel still had frequent medical appointments, early stimulation therapies, and required special care because of his heart condition. Clara adjusted her work schedule at the hospital to dedicate more time to her son. Her work friends formed an incredible support network, helping with rides, preparing meals, and offering words of encouragement on the most difficult days. But despite the challenges, Clara had never felt so fulfilled in her entire life. Miguel was a special child in every sense of the word. As he grew, his unique personality began to shine. He had a contagious smile that lit up any room. His laughter was pure and genuine, coming from the depths of his soul. Clara realized he had an extraordinary ability to sense the emotions of those around him. If someone was sad, Miguel noticed immediately and tried to comfort them in his own way, offering a tight hug or making a funny face to bring a smile. When he turned 2, Clara began taking him to the hospital on days when she couldn't leave him with someone. At first, she hesitated, worried about what her colleagues and superiors would think. But Miguel quickly won everyone's hearts. He would sit in the maternity ward reception area, playing with his colorful toys, waving to passers-by. Pregnant women arriving nervously for their prenatal appointments would stop to talk to him, and somehow, the presence of that cheerful and loving boy calmed their anxieties. Doctors would stop to greet him, and nurses would make a point of stopping by reception just to see his smile. Miguel was, without realizing it, beginning to change the atmosphere of the hospital. It was during one of these hospital visits that something extraordinary happened. A young pregnant woman named Beatrice arrived at the maternity ward in a state of panic. It was her first pregnancy, and she had just discovered through tests that her baby also had Down syndrome. She was in tears, accompanied by her husband, who seemed equally lost and frightened. They sat in the waiting room, immersed in their fears and uncertainties about the future. Miguel, who was playing nearby with Clara, noticed the woman's sadness. With his still somewhat clumsy steps, He walked over to Beatrice and offered her his favorite toy, a yellow rubber duck. Beatrice looked at the boy with bright eyes and a wide smile, and something inside her stirred. Clara approached and gently introduced herself, explaining that Miguel was her son and that he also had Down syndrome. She began to tell her story, from the day Miguel was born and rejected by his biological parents, to the moment she decided to adopt him. She spoke about the challenges, yes, but mainly about the immeasurable joys that Miguel had brought into her life. Beatrice listened attentively to every word, while Miguel played happily at her feet, completely oblivious to the impact he was having. That conversation changed everything for Beatrice. She realized that the diagnosis wasn't a sentence, but simply a part of her son's identity. Seeing Miguel so full of life, so loved and happy, dispelled her fears. She and her husband left the hospital that day with a completely different perspective, grateful to have found Clara and Miguel. But that encounter was just the beginning. The story spread quickly through the hospital. Other parents who received diagnoses of disabilities or special conditions during pregnancy began asking to speak with Clara. She became a source of hope and guidance, and Miguel, unknowingly, became the perfect ambassador for the message that all life has value and potential. The hospital director, Dr. Henrique, a serious man with gray hair, observed this transformation with growing interest. He noticed that the rejection rate of babies with disabilities at the hospital had decreased significantly since Clara began sharing her story. More parents were choosing to accept and love their children, regardless of their conditions. Dr. Henrique called Clara into a meeting in his office one afternoon. She came in nervously, thinking that perhaps she was in trouble for taking Miguel to the hospital so often. But instead of a reprimand, Clara received a surprising proposal. Dr. Henrique wanted to create an official support program for families who received diagnoses of disabilities or special conditions in their babies. He wanted Clara to lead this program, sharing her experience and connecting these families with resources, therapies, and above all, hope. It would be a new position at the hospital, and Clara would have the autonomy to structure the program in the way she saw fit. She was speechless. She never imagined that her decision to adopt Miguel could have such a great impact. She accepted the proposal immediately, with tears in her eyes and gratitude in her heart. The program was launched 3 months later, named Project Hope Miguel. Clara organized support groups, brought in specialized speakers, created a library with informational materials, and established partnerships with therapists and organizations dedicated to children with special needs. But the heart of the program was always the same: to show that children like Miguel deserve love, opportunities, and celebration. The meetings took place every 2 weeks in the hospital auditorium, and Miguel was frequently present, interacting with the other children, making friends, and spreading joy wherever he went. The parents who participated in the program witnessed firsthand how much these children could flourish when they received adequate love and support. At 4 years old, Miguel was already a little celebrity at the Central Hospital. Everyone knew and loved him. He had a special routine. Every Friday afternoon, Clara would take him to visit the nursery. Dressed in a small gown that the nurses had made especially for him, Miguel would circulate among the cribs, always closely supervised, waving to the babies and humming nursery rhymes. The nurses said that the babies seemed calmer when Miguel was around. There was something in his pure, positive energy that soothed even the most restless newborns. Clara watched these scenes with a heart overflowing with pride and love. The boy who had been rejected at birth was now a source of comfort and joy for countless people. The transformation wasn't just in the hospital, but in everyone who had the privilege of knowing Miguel. One afternoon, while Miguel was playing in the hospital garden with other children from the Hope Project, Clara received an unexpected call. It was from the social worker who had handled his adoption process years before. She had disturbing news. Miguel's biological parents, the couple who had rejected him, wanted to make contact. They had seen a report about Project Hope on local television and recognized Miguel in the images. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. After all these years, after abandoning Miguel when he needed them most, now they wanted to show up? The social worker explained that legally they no longer had any rights over Miguel, as they had permanently relinquished custody. But they were asking for an opportunity to at least meet him, to explain, to perhaps ask for forgiveness. Clara didn't know what to feel. Anger, fear, confusion, everything mixed inside her. Her first reaction was to protect Miguel, to keep him away from people who had rejected him so cruelly. But at the same time, a part of her wondered if they had really changed, if their remorse was genuine. She talked to her therapist, to close friends, to Dr. Henrique. Everyone had different opinions. Some thought she owed nothing to that couple. Others suggested that perhaps the meeting could bring some kind of closure. Clara spent sleepless nights pondering the right decision. Finally, she decided to do what she thought would be best for Miguel in the long run. She agreed to a supervised meeting, but made it clear that it would be on her terms, in a neutral environment, and that Miguel would not be informed about who these people really were until she decided he was ready to know the truth. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in a private room at the hospital. Clara arrived early, nervous, with Miguel innocently playing with his tablet by her side. When the couple entered the room, Clara felt all the emotions of that day in the nursery return with full force. The woman, who now had a few gray hairs and deeper wrinkles, began to cry as soon as she saw Miguel. The man, once so confident and cold, seemed smaller, bowed by the weight of remorse. They introduced themselves as friends of the mother, and Miguel, with his welcoming nature, smiled and waved. For the next hour, Clara watched attentively as they cautiously interacted with Miguel. The woman spoke in a trembling voice about how they had made the biggest mistake of their lives, how fear and ignorance had blinded them at that crucial moment. She explained that in the following years they had tried to have other children, but had not been able to. It was then that they began to understand that they had rejected not only a baby with a special condition, but their own child, a blessing that would never be repeated. They said they didn't expect forgiveness. They didn't want to claim anything. They just wanted Miguel to know someday that they deeply regretted it and that they were very sorry. Clara listened silently, studying their faces, searching for sincerity. And to her surprise, she found it. There was genuine pain in those eyes, true remorse in those voices. This didn't erase what they had done. It didn't justify the cruel rejection, but it was human. They had failed, terribly, but they were trying, in some twisted and belated way, to make peace with that failure. When the meeting ended and the couple left, Clara was left alone with Miguel, who immediately resumed playing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. And perhaps, for him, nothing extraordinary had really happened. He was safe, loved, happy. That night, Clara made a decision. She would allow sporadic contact, perhaps a few visits a year, always supervised. She wouldn't do it for the couple, but for Miguel. When he was older and asked questions about his origins, she wanted to be able to honestly say that she had given him the opportunity to know his complete story, including the painful parts. But one thing was clear in her heart. She was and always would be Miguel's true mother, the one who chose to love him when others gave up. And absolutely nothing would change that. The years passed like pages in a book filled with precious moments. Miguel grew up surrounded by love, support, and opportunities that many doubted a child like him could have. At 7 years old, he was in regular school, attending an institution that embraced inclusion with seriousness and dedication. Clara had researched extensively before choosing the school, visiting dozens of options, talking to principals, teachers, and other parents. She wanted to ensure that Miguel would have not only access to education, but a quality education, adapted to his needs without underestimating his potential. Girasol School was the perfect choice. There, Miguel made true friends, children who saw him simply as Miguel, not as the boy with Down syndrome. He had a best friend named Sophia, a spirited girl with curly hair who fiercely defended him from any mean comments in the schoolyard. The two were inseparable, sharing snacks, playing in the playground, and inventing fantastic stories during recess. Miguel's teacher, Dona Marcia, an experienced educator with a huge heart, often commented to Clara about the positive impact Miguel had on the class. He taught his classmates empathy simply by existing, by being who he was. The other children learned about differences, about patience, about the beauty of diversity through their daily interaction with him. Meanwhile, Project Hope Miguel continued to grow and thrive at Central Hospital. What had begun as bi-weekly meetings had transformed into a multifaceted program that included individual counseling, support groups for siblings of children with disabilities, workshops on legal rights and benefits, and even a resource bank with medical and therapeutic equipment that families could borrow free of charge. Clara hired a small team to help her manage everything, including 2 specialized psychologists, a social worker, and an administrative coordinator. The program had served over 300 families in recent years, and the results were impressive. Internal hospital studies showed that the abandonment rate of babies with disabilities had fallen to almost 0 since the project's implementation. More than that, families participating in the program reported much higher levels of confidence, preparedness, and happiness upon receiving their children. Clara's work did not go unnoticed beyond the walls of Central Hospital. She was invited to present the program at regional and national medical conferences, and other hospitals began to seek her out for guidance on implementing similar initiatives in their own institutions. Clara never imagined she would become a leading figure in the field, but she accepted the role with humility and determination. One spring, when Miguel was 8 years old, the Central Hospital received a proposal from a national television network. They wanted to make a documentary about Project Hope and tell Miguel's story from the beginning. The producer had explained that the story had all the elements of a powerful narrative: rejection, adoption, overcoming adversity, social transformation. It would be an opportunity to reach millions of people, to spread the message of inclusion and acceptance on a scale that Clara could never achieve alone. But she hesitated. Would exposing Miguel in this way, sharing the most painful details of his story with the entire country, be the right decision? She talked at length with Miguel about it, explaining it in terms he could understand. Miguel, with his simple and direct wisdom, said that if his story could help other babies not be rejected as he was, then he wanted to participate. That answer, coming from such a pure heart, settled the matter. Clara agreed to the documentary, but set strict conditions. Nothing would be filmed without her approval. Miguel would have veto power over any content that made him uncomfortable, and the focus would always be on the positive message, not on exploiting the trauma. The production team agreed to all the conditions and began filming a few months later. The documentary took almost a year to produce. The cameras followed Clara and Miguel in their daily routine, captured moments at the hospital during Project Hope meetings, and recorded moving interviews with families who had been helped by the program. They interviewed doctors, nurses, Miguel's teacher, his school friends, and even Dr. Henrique, who spoke proudly about how a dedicated nurse and a special little boy had revolutionized the culture of his hospital. The most challenging part for Clara was deciding whether or not to include Miguel's biological parents in the documentary. After much reflection and conversations with therapists, she decided that yes, they should participate. Not to publicly shame them, but because their remorse was an important part of the story. It showed that people can change, that they can grow beyond their mistakes, and that redemption, while not erasing the past, still has value. The biological parents agreed to be interviewed, and it was one of the most moving scenes in the entire documentary. They spoke openly about their mistake, about the prejudice that blinded them, about the years of remorse that followed. The biological mother said something that remained etched in the memory of everyone who watched. "We rejected our son because we were afraid of what others would think, of what our lives would become. But in doing so, we lost the chance to know an extraordinary human being. This is a pain we will carry forever." The documentary aired on a Thursday night during prime time. Clara and Miguel watched it together at home, wrapped in a blanket on the sofa, with popcorn and hot chocolate. Miguel was delighted to see himself on television, laughing at his own antics and pointing at his friends when they appeared on screen. For him, it was all a great fun adventure. For Clara, it was a complex mix of emotions. Seeing that entire journey condensed into 90 minutes made her relive every moment, every challenge, every victory. Tears streamed freely down her face as she watched the part about the day the adoption was finalized, when she could finally officially call Miguel her son. The reaction to the documentary was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with comments, shares, and messages of support. The phone number for Project Hope, which had been released at the end of the program, began ringing incessantly. Families from all over the country wanted to know more, asked for help, sought guidance. Hospitals were interested in replicating the program. People simply wanted to thank them for sharing such a beautiful and important story. In the following days, Clara was invited to talk shows, podcasts, and events. Miguel, always by her side when appropriate, won over audiences wherever he went with his natural charisma and irresistible smile. National exposure brought unexpected opportunities. A large foundation dedicated to the rights of people with disabilities contacted her, offering significant funding to expand Project Hope to other states. A publisher proposed that Clara write a book telling her story and offering practical guidance for parents of children with special needs. A university invited her to give regular lectures in its nursing program, teaching future healthcare professionals about the importance of empathy and humanized care. Clara accepted what she could manage without compromising her time with Miguel, who always was and always would be her #1 priority. Expanding Project Hope was her most ambitious choice. With the Foundation's funding, she developed a replicable model that other hospitals could adapt to their local realities. She created manuals, protocols, training materials, and even an online platform where families from different parts of the country could connect, share experiences, and support each other. Within 2 years, versions of Project Hope were operating in 15 hospitals in 8 different states. Thousands of families were being reached. Thousands of children were receiving the love and support they deserved from birth. Clara often reflected on how a single decision, made on a cold morning years ago, had created ripples that now touched lives across the country. It was both humbling and inspiring. Miguel remained the heart of it all. By the age of 10, he had developed a special passion for music. Clara enrolled him in keyboard lessons, and although his progress was slower than other children's, his dedication was unparalleled. He practiced every day, his small fingers patiently working the keys until he mastered each piece. His music teacher, Mr. Alberto, a retired musician with white hair and infinite patience, said that Miguel had something that couldn't be taught. He played with his soul. Every note had emotion, every melody told a story. Miguel also began participating in special performances at the hospital. Once a month, he played the keyboard in the main lobby, and patients, visitors, and staff stopped to listen. There was something deeply moving about seeing this boy, whom many would consider limited, creating beauty through music. The performances became so popular that the hospital had to create a regular schedule, and Miguel, always humble and cheerful, loved every moment. He also continued his visits to the nursery, now as a 10-year veteran advising new parents with wisdom disproportionate to his age. When nervous parents asked what it would be like to raise a child with Down syndrome, Miguel would simply smile and say, "It's going to be great. You're going to love me very much." This simplicity disarmed complex fears in a way that no sophisticated argument could. It wasn't all perfect, of course. There were difficult days, moments of frustration, and ongoing challenges. Miguel still had limitations in certain learning areas and needed constant support in tasks that other children mastered easily. There were regular medical appointments, weekly therapies, and the ongoing advocacy work to ensure he had access to all the resources and opportunities he deserved. Clara faced bureaucracy, occasional prejudice, and the inevitable exhaustion that comes with being a single mother of a child with special needs. But in every difficult moment, she looked at Miguel and remembered why it was all worthwhile. She remembered the baby abandoned in the nursery, the parents who couldn't see beyond a diagnosis, and she saw the incredible boy he had become. She saw his kindness, his resilience, his ability to find joy in simple things. She saw how he touched lives wherever he went, how he made the world a better place simply by existing in it. One afternoon, while watching Miguel play in the garden with Sophia and other school friends, Clara had a profound realization. She had spent years thinking she was saving Miguel, that she had rescued him from a dark fate of rejection and abandonment. But the truth, she realized, was exactly the opposite. Miguel had saved her. He had filled the void in her life, given purpose to her days, taught her the meaning of unconditional love. When Miguel turned 12, the Central Hospital organized a special celebration. It wasn't just his birthday they were celebrating, but also the 10th anniversary of Project Hope. The hospital auditorium was packed with hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the project. There were families who had participated in the support groups in the early days, children who were now healthy and happy teenagers, healthcare professionals who had changed their approach to care thanks to what they had learned from Clara and Miguel. There were even representatives from other hospitals that had implemented versions of the program. Dr. Henrique, now with more gray hair and nearing retirement, gave an emotional speech about how the Central Hospital had become a national benchmark in humanized and inclusive care, and how it all began with a courageous nurse and a special baby. Clara was called to the stage to speak, and for a moment she was paralyzed, looking at all those people. Then she felt Miguel's little hand slip into hers, squeezing tightly, giving her courage. She spoke from the heart, without prepared notes, simply sharing her truth. He spoke about love, about choosing to see possibilities instead of limitations, about how every child deserves a chance to show the world who they can be. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. Miguel then approached the microphone and, in his clear, sweet voice, simply said, "Thank you for loving me." It was simple, direct, and absolutely perfect. The celebration was followed by a special dinner where stories were shared, laughter echoed, and connections were strengthened. One of the families present was that of Beatrice, the young mother who had met Clara and Miguel in the waiting room years ago. Her son, Lucas, was now 9 years old and thriving. Beatrice hugged Clara for a long time and whispered a heartfelt thank you. Without that chance encounter, without seeing Miguel and realizing that the diagnosis wasn't the end of the world, she didn't know if she would have had the courage to move forward. Lucas and Miguel played together all night, two boys who shared more than a genetic condition. They shared the experience of being loved unconditionally. As she watched the scene, Clara thought of all the babies who had been saved from abandonment because of the work she had begun with Miguel. She thought of the mothers who found strength they didn't know they had, the fathers who learned that their expectations needed to change, but not diminish, the siblings who grew more empathetic and compassionate. The impact was immense, impossible to fully quantify. Later that night, as she was putting Miguel to bed, he asked a question she always knew would eventually come. "Mom, why didn't my first parents want me?" Clara took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. She sat on the edge of Miguel's bed and held his hand. She explained as honestly and age-appropriately as she could. She said that sometimes people get very scared when they don't understand something, and that fear can make people make bad decisions. She said that his biological parents weren't ready to be the parents he needed, but that this had nothing to do with his worth as a person. She said that she, Clara, had been chosen to be his mother, and that she wouldn't change a thing even if she could. Miguel was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he asked, "You chose me?" Clara smiled through her tears. "I chose you, yes, and I would choose you again, always." Miguel smiled that smile that illuminated any darkness and said, "I choose you too, Mom." At that moment, Clara knew they had reached a profound understanding. The initial rejection was part of Miguel's story, but it didn't define who he was or the love that surrounded him now. She kissed his forehead and turned off the light, leaving only the star-shaped lamp that projected constellations onto the ceiling. While Miguel fell asleep, Clara stayed there for a few more minutes, just watching, silently giving thanks for each day they had together. The teenage years brought new challenges and adventures. Miguel faced the typical complexities of puberty, compounded by his special needs, but with Clara's support, his network of therapists, and the unwavering loyalty of his friends, he navigated this phase with surprising grace. He developed an interest in art, discovering that although words were sometimes difficult for him, he could express himself magnificently through colors and shapes. His paintings were vibrant, full of emotion, and began to be exhibited in local galleries that celebrated artists with disabilities. One of his works, an abstract representation of a heart surrounded by hands, was chosen to illustrate a national adoption campaign and was reproduced on posters throughout the country. Miguel was immensely proud, and Clara framed the original poster in her room. Project Hope continued to grow. It now operated in 23 states and had inspired similar programs internationally. Clara had written her book, Choosing Love, A Journey from Rejection to Redemption, which became a bestseller and was used in nursing and medical courses at universities across the country. She used the book's royalties to fund scholarships for families who needed specialized therapies for their children but couldn't afford them. Each achievement, each life touched, was a testament to the power of a choice made with love. When Miguel was 16, something extraordinary happened that brought the complete story full circle. Clara received a call from the social worker who now worked with teenagers transitioning to adulthood. There was a 17-year-old girl in the system about to age out of foster care, and she had specifically asked to meet Clara and Miguel. Her name was Anna, and she also had Down syndrome. She had spent her entire life bouncing from foster family to institution, never finding a permanent home. But she had read Clara's book and watched the documentary countless times. Clara and Miguel represented hope for her, proof that people like her could have families, purpose, meaningful lives. When Clara and Miguel met Anna for the first time, the connection was instant. Anna was shy but sweet, with a hesitant smile that reminded Clara of little Miguel so many years ago. Over the following weeks, Anna began visiting them regularly. Miguel treated her like a younger sister, showing her his drawings, playing music on the keyboard for her, including her in his activities. Clara watched the relationship blossom and felt her heart expand in ways she didn't know were possible. One evening, while Anna was helping prepare dinner, she shyly asked if she could call Clara Mother. Clara didn't hesitate. She hugged Anna and said it would be an honor. Anna's adoption process was simpler than Miguel's had been years before, partly because Clara now had proven experience, and partly because Anna, at 17, had a voice in the process and made it clear she wanted to be part of that family. 6 months later, the adoption was finalized, and Anna officially became part of the family. Miguel was overjoyed to have a sister, and the two developed a special bond, supporting each other in ways that only people who share similar experiences can. Anna also joined Project Hope, participating in support groups and sharing her own journey of rejection and eventual acceptance. Her perspective as someone who had lived in the system for years was valuable and brought new depth to the program. The house that once seemed empty was now full of life, laughter, music, art, and abundant love. Clara often found herself stopping in the middle of everyday tasks just to absorb the reality of her life. She had 2 extraordinary children, a life-changing job, and a purpose that went beyond anything she could have imagined when she was a lonely nurse caring for other people's babies. The scars of infertility, loneliness, and a failed marriage had all been transformed into something beautiful and meaningful. When Miguel turned 18, the Central Hospital organized another special event, but this one had a different purpose. They were inaugurating a new maternity ward, specially designed to be welcoming and inclusive. The ward included family support rooms, spaces for therapists and counselors, a library with resources on all types of special needs, and most significantly, a huge mural on the main wall. The mural had been commissioned from Miguel, who worked on it for 6 months. It was a vibrant depiction of dozens of children of all colors, shapes, and abilities, all holding hands, forming a circle around a giant heart. Beside the heart, a single word: belonging. The inauguration ceremony attracted national media attention once again. Miguel, now a confident young adult, though still with his distinctive features, spoke to the crowd about the importance of each child knowing that they belong, that they are wanted, that they have value. His speech was simple, but profoundly impactful, delivered with the sincerity that always characterized him. Clara watched with indescribable pride, tears streaming freely. Anna was beside her, also crying, holding her mother's hand tightly. Dr. Henrique, now retired but present for the occasion, whispered to Clara, "Do you realize what you've accomplished? You've changed the culture of an entire healthcare system. You've saved hundreds, perhaps thousands of children from rejection, and all because you had the courage to choose love when it would have been easier to look away." In the following years, life continued at its natural pace. Miguel found work at an organization that employed adults with disabilities, working in the gardening of public spaces. He loved being outdoors, tending to plants, and watching things grow under his care. Anna developed a passion for baking and began working at an inclusive bakery where she created cakes and pastries that were as beautiful as they were delicious. Both continued living with Clara, but gained increasing autonomy, learning to navigate the world with confidence. Clara, now in her 60s, slowed down her work pace, but never stopped completely. Project Hope had a life of its own now, with a large and capable team. But she remained as a consultant and mentor. She continued to give talks occasionally, more out of love for the cause than out of necessity. Her greatest joy was simply being with her children, preparing meals together, watching movies on Friday nights, celebrating each small victory, and comforting them in every challenge. Miguel's biological parents maintained limited contact over the years. They never tried to claim a parental role, understanding that they had lost that right long ago, but they sent birthday cards and occasionally attended major events in Miguel's life. The relationship was cordial, but distant, and Miguel understood the dynamic. He had a natural curiosity about his origins, but there was never any doubt about who his real family was. One spring, 25 years after that fateful day in the nursery, Clara was invited to give the keynote address at a major international conference on inclusive healthcare. The event took place in a large city, in a huge convention center, with thousands of healthcare professionals from dozens of countries in attendance. Clara was nervous, more so than she had been in years. But Miguel and Anna insisted on accompanying her, and their presence gave her courage. When she stepped onto the stage and looked at the sea of faces before her, Clara felt the weight of everything that journey had meant. She began her talk not with statistics or theories, but with the story of a cold dawn, of a rejected baby, of a choice that changed everything. She spoke about Miguel, who was sitting in the front row smiling at her, about Anna, about the hundreds of families that had been transformed, about how love can be a revolutionary force when we choose to exercise it against all odds. Her voice echoed through the auditorium, carrying decades of experience, wisdom gained through challenges overcome, and a simple yet profound message: every life has immeasurable value. When she finished, the ovation was deafening. People stood, applauding for minutes that seemed like an eternity. Clara saw healthcare professionals wiping away tears, doctors and nurses embracing each other, all touched by the message that their work was not just technical, but profoundly human. After the talk, dozens of people approached Clara. There was a doctor from India who wanted to implement Project Hope in her hospital, a nurse from Canada who shared his own story of adopting a child with cerebral palsy, a young medical student who said Miguel's story inspired her to choose pediatrics with a focus on inclusive care. Each conversation, each connection made, was a reminder that Miguel's story continued to create ripples, reaching places and touching lives Clara never imagined possible. That night, in her hotel room, Clara reflected on it all. She thought about the woman she had been 25 years ago, lonely and without a clear purpose, and the woman she had become. She thought about the abandoned baby who was now a functioning adult man in the world, contributing to his community, loved and valued. She thought about Anna, who had spent so much time searching for a place to belong and had finally found it. She thought about the countless families whose stories had been rewritten because someone reached out to them at their most vulnerable moment and said, "You are not alone. Your son is a blessing." And she realized it all came down to a simple truth. Love is a choice. It's not a passive feeling that happens to you, but an active decision you make repeatedly, day after day, especially when it's difficult. Clara had chosen to love Miguel when it would have been easier to turn her back. And that choice had changed not only their lives, but reverberated through a hospital, a city, a country, and now it was touching the world. Returning home after the conference, Clara, Miguel, and Anna stopped at a park along the way. It was a beautiful spring day, with flowers blooming and birds singing. They sat on a bench near a lake, simply enjoying the peaceful afternoon. Children played in the nearby playground, and Clara watched a little girl with Down syndrome being pushed on a swing by her father, both laughing happily. She smiled, recognizing that this simple scene was the fruit of all the work that had been done. A generation ago, that girl might have been institutionalized or hidden from society. But now, there she was, playing freely, included, loved. Miguel followed Clara's gaze and understood what she was thinking. "We made a difference, didn't we, Mom?" he asked. Clara hugged him tightly. "You made a difference, my son. Just by existing, by being who you are, you changed the world." Anna joined the hug, and the three stayed there, united, a family formed not by biology but by choice, by love, by an unwavering commitment to caring for one another. Eventually, they got up and started walking back to the car. Miguel suddenly stopped and pointed to a bench that had a memorial plaque. "Mom, when you get really old, will they put your name on a bench too?" Clara laughed. "I don't know, love." "Why?" Miguel thought for a moment. "Because you should have a bench, so people can sit and remember how you taught everyone to love better." Miguel's simple observation perfectly summed it all up. In the end, the story wasn't about programs or recognitions or systemic changes, although all of that was important. It was about teaching people to love better, to see beyond perceived limitations, to choose inclusion instead of rejection. It was about recognizing that every human being, regardless of their abilities or disabilities, has inherent dignity and unique potential. Miguel had been rejected at birth because his parents saw only a diagnosis, a list of potential limitations, a deviation from what they considered perfection. But Clara saw a baby who needed love and chose to give it without reservation. And through that choice, through the life they built together, they proved that what society often dismisses as imperfect can, in fact, be extraordinary. Miguel didn't change the hospital despite his disability, but in a way, because of it. His existence challenged assumptions, broke down prejudices, and opened hearts that were closed to possibilities. He taught that human value is not measured by IQ or physical ability, but by kindness, authenticity, and the capacity to touch other lives. And he did all this simply by being himself, with his infectious smile, his generous heart, and his unique way of seeing the world. Several more years passed, and Clara began to think about legacy in a more concrete way. She wasn't getting any younger, and although she was healthy, she wanted to ensure that the work she had started would continue long after she was gone. She worked with lawyers to establish an official foundation endowed with sufficient resources to ensure that Project Hope would continue operating indefinitely. She appointed a board of directors composed of healthcare professionals, parents of children with disabilities, and, significantly, 2 adults with Down syndrome who had distinguished themselves in their communities. Miguel was invited to join the board, and he accepted with pride, taking his responsibilities very seriously. He frequently surprised the other board members with profound insights into how the programs could be more inclusive and respectful. Anna also got involved, creating a special initiative within the foundation focused on teenagers with disabilities who were aging out of the foster care system, ensuring that no one else would go through the lonely years she had experienced. The foundation grew rapidly, attracting donations from individuals and corporations who had been touched by Miguel's story. With the additional resources, they expanded beyond hospitals, creating programs in schools, workplaces, and communities, always with the same central mission: to promote inclusion, acceptance, and love. One memorable day, when Miguel was 28 years old, he arrived home visibly emotional. Clara was immediately concerned, but he quickly explained that they weren't tears of sadness. He had met someone, a young woman named Livia, who also had Down syndrome and worked at the same garden center as him. They had become friends over months, and the feelings had evolved into something deeper. Miguel was in love. Clara felt a complex mix of emotions: joy at seeing her son experience this fundamental aspect of human life, pride at seeing his confidence and emotional independence, and yes, a little protective fear that every mother feels when her child opens their heart to another person. But she also recognized that this was another important milestone, further proof that Miguel was living a full and meaningful life. In the following months, Clara had the opportunity to meet Livia and her family. They were wonderful people who had raised their daughter with the same love and support that Clara had given Miguel. The two families connected quickly, sharing stories, challenges, and victories. Livia was perfect for Miguel, kind, cheerful, and with a passion for music that matched his. They often played the piano together, creating awkward but loving duets that made everyone around them smile. 2 years later, Miguel and Livia announced they wanted to get married. For some, the idea of 2 adults with Down syndrome getting married was still controversial, full of questions about ability, responsibility, and independence. But for Clara and Livia's family, there was no doubt. Their children were adults capable of making their own decisions, and they deserved to celebrate their love just like anyone else. The wedding was a beautiful event, held in the garden of the Central Hospital, the place where Miguel's journey had begun so many years before. Hundreds of people attended, friends from school, from work, families who had participated in Project Hope over the years, healthcare professionals who had been transformed by Miguel's story. Dr. Henry, now over 80 years old but still as sharp as ever, was one of the guests of honor. During the ceremony, Miguel read his vows to Livia in a clear and emotional voice. He promised to love her, take care of her, make her laugh every day, and play music for her when she was sad. There wasn't a single person present who wasn't crying. Anna was the maid of honor, radiant in her pink dress, supporting her brother in this crucial moment. Clara, watching her son take this monumental step, thought of all the people who doubted he could have such a life, all the voices that said children like Miguel were too limited, too dependent, too different. And there he was, getting married, committing himself to another person, living proof that love knows no limits. Miguel and Livia moved into an adapted apartment designed specifically for adults with special needs who wanted to live semi-independently. Support was available when needed, but they managed their own home, their own routines, their own lives. Clara visited regularly, but always giving them space to grow as a couple. It was an emotional adjustment for her, letting go a little, trusting that Miguel would be okay. But every time she visited and saw the joy on their faces, the way they cared for each other, she knew she had made the right choice in supporting them. Miguel's marriage received media coverage, not out of curiosity, but as a celebration of social progress. It was featured in articles about disability rights, about autonomy and self-determination, about how society was finally beginning to recognize that everyone deserves the chance to live full lives, including experiencing romantic love and partnership. The story inspired other couples in similar situations to pursue their own paths to marriage, breaking down more barriers, challenging more assumptions. Clara received hundreds of messages from parents thanking her for showing what was possible, for expanding horizons that many didn't even know existed. Each message reminded her that the journey that had begun with a rejected baby continued to create waves, reaching further than she had ever imagined. When Clara turned 70, her health began to show the natural signs of age-related decline. Nothing serious, but the inevitable reminders of mortality. She began having difficult but necessary conversations with Miguel and Ana about the future, about what would happen when she was no longer there. It was painful for everyone, but Clara persisted. She wanted to ensure her children would be well cared for, that they would have support, that the life they had built together would continue in some meaningful way. She worked with lawyers to establish appropriate guardianships, trusts to guarantee financial security, and a network of friends and family who had promised to remain present in Miguel and Ana's lives. But more important than any legal or financial arrangement, Clara spent time reminding her children how much they were loved, how much they had mattered, how they had changed the world simply by existing in it. She told stories of their childhood, of the milestones they had reached, the challenges they had overcome, the joys they had shared. She wanted them to carry these memories, to know deep in their souls that they had been wanted, valued, and celebrated every day of their lives. One afternoon, while the three were flipping through old photo albums, Miguel found a picture from the day his adoption was finalized. He was 6 months old, wrapped in a blanket, in Clara's arms at the courthouse. He looked at the photo for a long time and then said, "Mom, you saved me." Clara shook her head, tears in her eyes. "No, my love. We saved each other." The foundation continued to thrive under the leadership of its dedicated team. Project Hope now operated in 40 states and had been replicated in 12 different countries. More than 50,000 families had been directly served over the years, and the indirect impact was impossible to calculate. The abandonment rate of babies with disabilities in hospitals that implemented the program had fallen to almost zero. An entire generation of healthcare professionals had been trained with empathy and inclusive care as core values. Schools had become more welcoming and adapted. Workplaces had opened their doors to employees with disabilities. The cultural shift that Clara and Miguel had initiated in that hospital so many years ago had spread in ways that transformed the very fabric of society. Of course, there was still much work to be done. Prejudice doesn't disappear overnight, and centuries-old systems of exclusion take time to dismantle. But the progress was undeniable, and every small victory mattered. Every child who wasn't rejected, every family that found support instead of loneliness, every adult with a disability who found employment or independent housing, or even got married and built their own family, all of this represented the living legacy of a choice made on a cold morning. A nurse who saw an abandoned baby and decided that child deserved love. It was as simple and as profound as that. Years later, when Clara was 75, the Central Hospital decided to rename the new maternity ward. It would be called Clara and Miguel's Wing, a lasting tribute to the pair who had transformed not only that hospital, but contributed to changes throughout the healthcare system. The renaming ceremony was an emotional event. Clara, now moving more slowly but still with that gentle sparkle in her eyes, was surrounded by her family. Miguel and Livia, Ana and her new boyfriend, and dozens of non-biological grandchildren. Children who had been helped by the program over the years and who considered Clara an honorary grandmother. As they unveiled the plaque with the ward's new name, Clara couldn't hold back her tears. She thought of all the nights working in those corridors, all the babies she had held, all the families she had comforted. Not even in her wildest dreams could she have imagined that her life would take this turn. The speech she gave was brief but powerful. She spoke about how a life can change with a single decision, about how love is both a verb and a feeling, about how each of us has the power to make a difference if we simply choose to see the people around us as human beings worthy of respect and compassion. She finished by looking directly at Miguel, who was in the front row with tears streaming down his face. "You were rejected at birth, my son. But look around you now. You are loved by hundreds, admired by thousands, and your story has touched millions. You have transformed this hospital, changed countless lives, and taught me the true meaning of being a mother. Thank you for choosing me, too." Clara's final years had been peaceful and filled with contentment. She had slowed down significantly, spending most of her time at home, receiving visitors, reading, and simply enjoying the peace of a life well lived. Miguel and Livia visited her weekly, always bringing stories about their lives, about the community garden where they worked, about the friends they had made. Anna, who now ran her own small custom cake business, stopped by almost every day, often bringing new products for Clara to try. The house was always full of life, love, and laughter. Clara kept in touch with many of the families she had helped over the years. She received letters, emails, and video messages showing children who were now adults, living full lives, contributing to their communities. Each of these updates warmed her heart, reminding her that her work had mattered, that she had left the world a little better than she found it. One autumn afternoon, sitting in her favorite garden, watching the leaves change color, Clara reflected on her completed journey. She thought of the young nurse she had been, wounded by infertility and divorce, searching for purpose. She thought of the moment she held Miguel for the first time and felt that inexplicable connection. She thought of all the challenges they had faced together, all the victories celebrated, all the tears shed, both of joy and frustration. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she wouldn't change a thing. Every difficult moment had been worth it. Every sacrifice had been rewarded 1,000 times over. Every doubt had been dispelled by the reality of the extraordinary life they had built. When Clara passed away peacefully in her sleep at 78, metaphorically surrounded by the love of all those she had touched, the grief was profound but also mixed with celebration. Her funeral brought together hundreds of people, transforming into less of a somber farewell and more of a tribute to the extraordinary life she had lived. Miguel, supported by Livia and Anna, managed to speak, his voice trembling but clear. He spoke of the mother who had chosen him when no one else wanted him, who fought for him, who believed in him, who loved him unconditionally. "My mother taught me that being rejected doesn't define who you are. She taught me that everyone deserves love. And she taught me that one person can change the world, one kind choice at a time." There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. After the funeral, the foundation established the Clara Memorial Grant, which would fully fund medical care and therapies for children with disabilities whose families could not afford them. It was a way to ensure that her work would continue, that her compassion would continue to reach those who needed it most. In the following months, articles were written about her life, television programs aired special retrospectives, and universities began including her story in nursing and medical curricula as an example of exemplary care and compassionate advocacy. But for Miguel and Anna, she was simply their mother. The woman who had loved them when the world said they were unworthy of love. And that legacy, more than any public recognition, was what truly mattered. Miguel continued living his life, carrying Clara's lessons in his heart. He and Livia, in turn, became mentors to younger couples with disabilities who were navigating relationships and marriage. Miguel frequently visited the Central Hospital, now not just as a symbol, but as an active volunteer, talking to new parents, sharing his story, offering hope. He had become, in many ways, a continuation of Clara's work, proving through his own existence that lives considered limited can, in fact, be limitlessly meaningful. Anna also flourished, expanding her cake business and employing other young adults with disabilities, creating opportunities where barriers once existed. Project Hope continued to grow under new leadership, but always honoring the principles Clara had established. And always, the story returned to the beginning, to a rejected baby on a cold dawn, to a nurse who made a choice, to a love that transformed not just 2 lives, but thousands. This is a story about many things, about disability and ability, about rejection and acceptance, about despair and hope. But fundamentally, it is a story about love. About how love isn't something we simply feel, but something we choose to do day after day, especially when it's difficult. About how an ordinary person can do extraordinary things when they act with compassion. And about how absolutely every life has immeasurable value and the potential to change the world. Miguel was rejected at birth because his parents saw a disability. Clara chose him because she saw a child. And that difference in perspective made all the difference in the world. In the end, perhaps that's the most important lesson. That the way we choose to see people, especially those marginalized by society, defines not only their possibilities but our own as well. Clara and Miguel didn't just change a hospital. They changed hearts, minds, and lives. And that legacy continues in every family helped, in every child loved, in every person who chooses to see possibilities instead of limitations. The story of a rejected baby who changed a hospital is, in fact, the story of how love can change everything.